They say ghosts linger where tragedy struck. After what I've seen at Gettysburg, Antietam, the beaches of Normandy, and the windswept bluffs of Little Bighorn, I'm inclined to agree. My pilgrimage began in Pennsylvania. Gettysburg looks like any quaint college town until you stand on Cemetery Ridge and realize July 1863 marked a turning point in the Civil War and stands as one of the deadliest battles in American history. By the end of the conflict, then 50,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or disappeared. For decades, stories of wandering spirits across the Gettysburg battlefield, local buildings, and nearby woods have captivated visitors and residents alike. People claim to hear phantom footsteps, ghostly drumbeats, and echoes of musket fire and cannon blasts. I joined a small ghost tour at dusk and followed our guide to Devil's Den, a tangle of boulders where Confederate sharpshooters once picked off Union troops. As the last light bled from the sky, my camera shut off without warning, and everyone in our group fell silent, as if listening for something. In the stillness, we heard a faint drumming that didn't belong to any tourist. Footsteps crunched in the gravel behind us, then stopped. Our guide told us that visitors have reported phantom footsteps, ghostly drumbeats, and echoes of musket fire for more than a century. When we rounded a bend, a barefoot man in ragged clothing stepped out from between the rocks, pointed toward the hill, and said, "What you're looking for is over there," then vanished. No one laughed. He had looked too solid. We crossed Triangular Field, northwest of Devil's Den, under a moonless sky. Shadows moved where no one stood. I felt fingers brush my arm, though I was alone on my side of the path. Later, I learned that visitors often report shadowy figures, phantom touches, and an oppressive presence here. At Little Round Top, the wind carried the distant crack of muskets, even though the last shots were fired here in 1863. In town, we stopped at the Jenny Wade House, where the battle's only civilian casualty was struck by a stray bullet as she baked bread. Doors opened and closed on their own, and disembodied whispers drifted through the kitchen. At Gettysburg College, 2 administrators once saw the elevator open onto a Civil War-era operating room with wounded soldiers and frantic nurses. Standing in that elevator shaft, I imagined them trapped between floors of time. A local historian later told me that many believe the restless dead walk these grounds because when you have tens of thousands dead, missing or wounded in the span of 3 days, that leaves a stain that can never be washed away. I left Gettysburg feeling that the line between past and present is thin there, that echoes of July 1863 continue to reverberate. Maryland's Antietam battlefield is quieter, but the sunken road, known as Bloody Lane, feels malevolent. On 17 September 1862, more than 23,000 soldiers were killed or wounded here, making it America's bloodiest single day of war. Today, park rangers and visitors report ghostly soldiers marching, the sounds of gunfire and the smell of gunpowder lingering in the air. The Dunker Church and Bloody Lane are especially active. I walked the lane alone at twilight. The reddish earth is deeply rutted from wagon wheels and erosion, but if you listen closely, you can still hear boots scuffing along its path. A breeze carried the metallic scent of blood and burnt powder. My throat closed as though I'd inhaled smoke. Halfway down the lane, I heard a volley of musket fire and instinctively ducked, though the only other living thing nearby was a squirrel. People have told stories of seeing gray-clad soldiers standing in the mists, their faces indistinct, and of hearing Irish voices singing just before dawn. I didn't see figures, but the lane felt crowded. When I reached the white Dunker Church, my eyes stung and my ears rang. I know it's impossible, but it felt as though the ground itself remembered. Normandy was a different kind of haunting. I went in early June, near the anniversary of D-Day. On June 6, 1944, thousands of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches to begin the liberation of Europe. Omaha Beach, where hundreds fell, looks serene until the tide goes out and reveals jagged obstacles rusting in the surf. Local guides told me that visitors sometimes see ghostly figures walking along the sands and fields where the fighting took place. One night I sat alone at Pointe du Hoc, the cliff scaled by U.S. Rangers. A mist rolled in from the channel and I heard, faintly at first, the flapping of parachutes. During D-Day's airborne assault, paratroopers were dropped behind German lines. Witnesses have reported seeing ghostly paratroopers caught on trees or hanging from fences. In the fog, I saw shapes dangling from an apple tree near the road, then realized there was nothing there when I drew closer. Further up the coast, someone on our tour swore he saw a soldier run up the beach and then disappear. Another night, by a hedgerow near Caen, I thought I heard the distant rumble of engines. People claim to see ghostly tanks still moving across the Normandy countryside and even hear a German Tiger tank roaring through town. Whether these are echoes or imaginations, it is difficult to stand on those beaches and not feel that some part of June 1944 remains. My last stop was the Little Bighorn battlefield in Montana. Nearly 400,000 tourists visit its ravines and ridges each year. The wind whips across Last Stand Hill, where Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his men were surrounded by Lakota and Cheyenne warriors in June 1876. The Indians lost perhaps 50 to 100 warriors, whose bodies were carried away by their families. The adjacent National Cemetery holds some 5,000 veterans and family members. If ever a place might harbor ghosts, it is here. Park employees told me that stories of supernatural encounters have circulated for decades. The Crow people even called the superintendent the ghost herder, because he lowered the flag at dusk, allowing spirits to walk the grounds until morning. Walking through the cemetery one evening, I felt sudden pockets of cold that made my hair stand on end. Out by Battle Ridge, I heard hoofbeats and the muffled whoops of warriors that faded as quickly as they came. A ranger described how a law enforcement officer felt a sudden drop in temperature on Last Stand Hill, accompanied by murmuring voices. Another tale recounts a woman who dreamed of an Indian killing a soldier and later learned of a name not found on the roster. Perhaps the most striking story came from a Crow ranger named Mardell Plainfeather. One evening in 1980, she saw two Indian warrior spirits sitting on their horses along the bluffs. They looked down at her before fading away. Mardell said they didn't frighten her and mused that maybe they were happy a native woman was telling their story. Standing where she once stood, with the wind whipping at my jacket and the prairie grass sighing, I sensed the same melancholy pride. The legend of the Mothman, that red-eyed phantom said to haunt Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I've heard my share of campfire yarns. Growing up in Ohio, ghost stories were as common as fishing trips and 4th of July fireworks. I'd watch the documentaries about Flatwoods, Goatman, the Jersey Devil, you name it. To me, they were entertainment. Cautionary tales wrapped up in spooky packaging was nothing more than a footnote of Appalachian folklore. That was until the autumn of 2023, when a routine detour turned into something that still chills me when I'm alone at night. I was driving east on U.S. Route 35, heading from Columbus, Ohio, to visit my sister in Richmond, Virginia. I'd taken this route dozens of times, but a rock slide near the Kanawha River had traffic backed up for miles. My GPS suggested exiting at Point Pleasant and cutting down through rural roads. I remembered vaguely that Point Pleasant was the town where people reported seeing a man-sized bird in 1966 and 1960. I even chuckled when I saw the sign for Mothman Museum, next exit. By late afternoon, the sky had that heavy, gray quality of early November. Rain started spitting. My check engine light flickered. Then the temperature gauge shot up. I pulled into a service station, a squat cinder block building with a faded mobile sign. The mechanic, an older man with oil-blackened hands, told me he'd have to order a part from Charleston. "Won't get here till tomorrow," he said. "You can get a room up at the River's Edge Motel if you're staying. Only place that's still open after Labor Day." I didn't have much of a choice. The River's Edge sat on Main Street, a two-story motel whose neon sign buzzed weekly. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd lived through every year since the Silver Bridge collapsed in 1967, handed me a brass key and warned me to keep the windows shut after dark. She said it without irony, as if she were telling me where to find the ice machine. I tried to sleep, but the walls were thin, and every truck on Route 62 rattled the bed, so I decided to walk. 5 miles north of town is the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, known locally as the TNT area, 3,655 acres of wartime industrial land dotted with ponds and woodlands. During World War II, it housed a munitions plant that manufactured 500,000 pounds of TNT per day. The abandoned igloos, overgrown and graffiti-covered, were supposed to be eerily beautiful. More importantly, the fresh air might clear my head. I drove the rental car as far as the gravel would allow, then walked down a dirt path. The silence struck me first. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a forest. No crickets or frogs, no rustling leaves. It was dead still. Even the night air felt heavy. A sweet, metallic smell, like sulfur and old blood, lingered. My flashlight beam bounced across thick vines and the rounded hump of a concrete bunker. That's when I saw them. 2 red orbs, hovering about 10 feet off the ground. At first I thought they were taillights, but there was no road. They blinked. They moved. Not like a person's eyes, but like something tilting its head. The beam of my flashlight caught a shape. Wings tucked against a slender, muscular torso, almost 7 feet tall. It stayed just long enough for me to register what I was seeing. Then it shot straight up without a sound. My brain froze. My legs didn't. I sprinted back toward the car, branches whipping my face. Behind me, I heard a high-pitched screech like metal scraping metal. When I reached the gravel lot, the rain had intensified. There were no footprints, no glowing eyes, just rain pinging off the hood. Back at the motel, I deadbolted the door and shut the curtains. I tried to rationalize. Maybe I'd seen a deer reflected in the water. Maybe those stories about sandhill cranes being misidentified as the Mothman were true. I flipped on the TV, just static. Around 2 a.m., a rhythmic tap. Tap, tap on the window jolted me. My room was on the 2nd floor, the only thing outside a narrow metal balcony. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. When I finally pulled back the curtain, my heart stopped. Behind the rain-streaked glass, backlit by flashes of lightning, stood a shadowy figure with broad wings and glowing red eyes. It filled the window from top to bottom. It didn't try to break in, it just stared, the way an owl studies a mouse. Then, in the time it takes to blink, it was gone. Sleep didn't come. I packed my bag and waited for dawn, listening to the hum of the motel's ice machine like it might drown out my thoughts. At sunrise, I went to the diner next to the mechanic's shop. I asked the waitress, a woman who wore a Mothman Festival t-shirt, if she'd ever seen anything. "Not personally," she said, "but my uncle was on the Silver Bridge when it fell. He made it off. His best friend didn't." She told me how on December 15th, 1967, during rush-hour traffic, the bridge spanning the Ohio River collapsed, killing 46 people. Folks around here said the Mothman sightings were a warning. They still hold a festival each September. Nearly 10,000 people come, pose with the 12-foot bronze statue, and buy Mothman cookies. Tourism keeps the town alive, she said. But that thing, it's real. We all know someone who knows someone who's seen it. When the mechanic handed me my keys, he asked if I'd enjoyed my night. I hesitated. Do people around here ever talk about seeing things? He nodded slowly. You weren't out at the TNT area, were you? His eyes were serious. They come out there sometimes when a bad thing is fixing to happen. Saw it in 66, saw it before the flood in 92. My wife swears she saw them after that chemical spill in 24. Whatever it is, it ain't our business. I'd flown to Helsinki for a conference in September 2024. On my last day, a Finnish colleague offered to drive me to the countryside. He asked if I'd heard of Lake Bodom. I shrugged. He smiled, a little too knowingly, and said, It's where 3 kids were killed and the killer was never found. Want to see it? 20 minutes later, we were leaving the highway and passing through Uitta Manor, a lush parkland where locals picnic and swim in summer. There were no signs pointing to murder site or anything macabre. Lake Bodom looked idyllic, a 3-kilometer stretch of dark water rimmed by birch trees. But the chill in the air wasn't just from the Finnish autumn. As we walked, my colleague told me the story. On the night of June 4th, 1960, 2 15-year-old girls, Maila Irmeli Björklund and Anja Tulikki-Meki, camped at the shore with their 18-year-old boyfriends Seppo Boisman and Niels Gustafsson. Sometime between 4 and 6 in the morning, an unknown assailant attacked the tent from outside, stabbing and bludgeoning the teens. When police arrived at noon, 3 were dead. Niels lay outside, unconscious, his jaw broken and face bruised. The case shocked Finland and remains its most notorious unsolved crime. The more I heard, the stranger it got. Investigators didn't secure the scene. Curious locals trampled through, contaminating evidence. The murder weapons, a knife and a blunt object, were never found. Personal items like shoes and motorcycle keys were taken, then discarded hundreds of yards away. There were suspects. Carl Valdemar Gilstrom, a kiosk owner known for harassing campers, supposedly confessed when drunk. He drowned himself in 1969. Others pointed at Hans Assmann, a German-born Finnish man who showed up at a Helsinki hospital with bloody clothes on June 6, 1960. He had an alibi but remained the boogeyman in locals' whispers. In 2004, nearly 44 years later, the sole survivor, Niels Gustafsson, was arrested when new DNA analysis suggested the victim's blood was on his shoes. His trial in 2005 ended in acquittal because the evidence was inconclusive. The court awarded him damages, but the stain on his name never fully washed off. My colleague told me all this as we walked along a narrow trail. He spoke with the detached tone of someone reciting a legend, but there was a weight behind it. People say the spirits here are restless, he said. Some even say the killer never left. We reached a small clearing, the supposed campsite. There was no memorial, just a damp patch of grass and some gnarled roots. The lake lay still, mirror black, as wind whispered through the birches. My friend checked his watch and said he needed to make a call. He walked back towards the car, leaving me alone. At first I soaked in the silence. Then the hair on the back of my neck prickled. Somewhere in the trees, a twig snapped. I turned, but saw only swaying branches. The temperature seemed to drop. I took a step toward the water and felt something soft under my shoe, a bit of cloth, half buried in mud. When I crouched down, I saw it was a torn fragment of a shirt, faded and rotten, the pattern barely visible. My mind told me it was nothing. My gut flipped anyway. A splash broke the stillness. At the corner of my eye, I saw ripples spreading from a shadow near the shore. The shape was human-sized, pale against the dark water. It drifted, almost imperceptibly, as if watching me. I blinked. It was gone. That's when I heard a breath that wasn't mine. It was right behind me, a wet inhalation. I spun around and found myself staring at a figure standing among the trees. He was tall, blond, and his eyes seemed unnaturally bright. For a split second, I thought of the witness reports. Boys bird-watching had seen a blond man walking away from the collapsed tent. For a moment, I wondered if time folds in on itself, if the killer walks this path forever. My rational mind insisted this was a hiker, but the way he looked at me made my blood turn to ice. "Beautiful lake, isn't it?" he said, in flawless English with a German lilt. I tried to respond, but my voice stuck. He smiled, turned, and walked toward the trees. I swear he never made a sound. When I scrambled after him, he was gone. I practically ran back to the car. My colleague laughed at how pale I was until he saw my eyes. "You saw something, didn't you?" he whispered, more to himself than to me. He didn't ask for details. On the flight home to Boston, I read everything I could about the Lake Bodom murders. I learned that Niels Gustafsson always maintained he glimpsed the attacker's bright red eyes. I read that Gillstrom cut down tents and threw rocks at campers. I read how Asmin showed up with blood-stained clothes but was never charged. None of it brings those 3 teenagers back. None of it explains the cold breath on my neck or the blond man who vanished between the trees. Believe me when I say I'm not superstitious. But there are places in this world where the veil feels thinner, where tragedies seem to echo. Lake Bodom is one of them. 50-plus years later, there is still no answer to who killed Mila, Anja, and Seppo. Maybe the killer died decades ago, taking his secret to the grave.